Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The Bishop Paiute tribe is pushing for negotiations with the city of Los Angeles over water use. As it has for decades, LA pumps hundreds of thousands of gallons of groundwater from Owens Valley every year, which has depleted much of the streams and lakes on and around Bishop Paiute land. We'll talk about that and a Trump administration proposal to significantly limit the power of the Clean Water Act. That's all after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull, sitting in for Antonia Gonzalez. In Tahlequah, Oklahoma this week, Cherokee language speakers and officials unveiled a Cherokee language dictionary app. They were joined by representatives of Kewah Digital Limited, who developed the app based on a Cherokee dictionary 50 years ago, created by native speaker Durbin Feeling. Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. said the new app will allow every Cherokee family to carry the resource in their pockets, and represented the tribe's sovereignty and knowledge, as well as their commitment to keep the Cherokee language strong for generations to come.
For the last 5 centuries, our language and our culture has been under assault, has been eroded, and that's the story of indigenous languages around the world, many of which are part of history books about languages that once were.
Hoskin said he expected the app to become more than a simple curiosity for tribal members and will be especially embraced by children and other youth. The Cherokee Language Dictionary app includes translations for more than 6,000 Cherokee words, with audio recordings, grammar notes, and phonetics. In September, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave an unusual speech at Top Brass in which he rallied against woke ideology and hyped the recently rebranded Department of War. He also weighed in on a long-simmering controversy involving the so-called Battle of Wounded Knee, which occurred on December 29, 1890, where hundreds of Lakotas were killed by the U.S. Army. Many consider that conflict a massacre and have called for the soldiers to be stripped of their medals of honor. Hegseth dismissed the idea as political correctness run amok and released a video defending the soldiers and their medals. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrorazio reports, it was a painful message for tribes throughout the country.
Under my direction, we're making it clear without hesitation that the soldiers who fought in the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1890 will keep their medals.
Although bipartisan efforts in Congress to rescind those medals go back decades, only a president has the legal authority beyond the Pentagon itself to undo that distinction.
This decision is now final, and their place in our nation's history is no longer up for debate. We salute their memory, we honor their service, and we will never forget what they did.
In what would be the final chapter of the Army's century-long Indian Wars campaign, as many as 300 Lakotas were killed at Wounded Knee in South Dakota, while at least 25 U.S. soldiers died. A rifle shot rang out when troops tried disarming a surrendering encampment on December 29, 1890. In that confusion, the mass slaughter of mostly unarmed men, women, and children ensued. Army General Nelson Appleton Miles penned in private, quote, "I have never heard of a more brutal, cold-blooded massacre than that at Wounded Knee. To this day, there is still no official death count." Hegseth's comments came a few weeks after President Trump signed an executive order rebranding his agency as the Department of War.
This is something we thought long and hard about. We've been talking about it for months, Pete and I think it's a much more appropriate name, especially in light of where the world is right now.
From the Russian invasion of Ukraine to the Israeli-Hamas conflict in Gaza, the same dynamics of Wounded Knee, of civilians being killed by conquering military forces, continue to play out all around the world, according to David Martinez.
And I would go further and say that what you see in contemporary American foreign policy was forged in America's battles with Indian people.
Tune in tomorrow to hear how the history of Wounded Knee continues for many Native people today. This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Skugdash. For more than 40 years, Ramona Farms has revived ancient traditional foods, tepary beans, pinoli, polentas, and more, all from store.ramonafarms.com. Ramona Farms supports this show. Tomye.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiver-resources.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Tribes in Owens Valley in California are pushing for negotiations with the city of Los Angeles over water rights. The country's second largest city gets about a third of its water from the valley. LA started diverting water from the Owens River in 1913. Within a decade, the nearly 110 square mile Owens Lake all but dried up. The city since then brought up land and began pumping groundwater more than 200 miles south in a complex aqueduct system. Tribes in the area now contend with a lack of water, toxic dust storms, environmental degradation, and habitat loss. We'll speak with the head of an organization working to increase water supply and quality to her community. But first, we're going to hear about a plan to loosen the EPA's oversight over water pollution. We also want to hear from you. If you're from Owens Valley or you see the issue of water management mirror your own community, you can join this conversation. Voice a comment or question by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Ashland, Oregon is Daniel Cordalis. He's a staff attorney with the Native American Rights Fund and leads the Tribal Water Institute. He is a citizen of the Navajo Nation. Daniel, good morning, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, for sure. The Trump administration proposes rollbacks on federal water protections for much of the country's wetlands. Give us a quick review. What does this proposal seek to accomplish?
Sure. The proposal really affects what we call, I shouldn't say, the Clean Water Act calls Waters of the United States. And what Waters of the United States is, as a definition, wasn't very clear in the Clean Water Act. And so the agencies have been interpreting it in different ways over time, and it's also been kind of goes back and forth between administrations. And really what it does is whatever and however we define waters of the United States really defines where the Clean Water Act federal protections apply. And so this current proposal, which was issued just about a month ago, in our view, significantly narrows, and I think the intention of it is to significantly narrow where the Clean Water Act can actually protect waters. And so that's generally in, what the regulation does is it's a part of this kind of the push for deregulation and for quicker permitting and probably in our minds a more development-friendly government.
What could this mean for tribes?
Well, I think this can mean a lot of different things depending on where the tribes are located. I mean, I think what the regulation does, it'll say that certain wetlands cannot be protected by federal law. Certain rivers and certain tributaries and certain streams cannot any longer be protected by federal law. And because these places will not be protected by federal law, it really creates kind of a lot of uncertainty and a regulatory gap. Whether those water bodies will receive any protections whatsoever. And so for tribes who rely on water quality, that's a function of ecosystem health, let's say, because wetlands are so important, right, to how an ecosystem functions, it could really impact that because these wetlands could no longer be protected. They could be filled in. They could be otherwise just non-functional as a part of the ecosystem. So say, in the Southwest where I'm from, and a lot of tribes are water scarce anyway, those kind of tributaries and those ephemeral streams that kind of come and go throughout the year could be the state jurisdiction, or they could be otherwise damaged through, development work, through mining, our push to mine. So I think there's a lot more water bodies that can be subject to risk and pollution, or even just being destroyed along the way. And so the resources that tribes have, whether it's drinking water possibly, or whether it's habitat for species or other things that they gather, I think are really kind of at risk.
And to provide a little bit more background for our listeners, these bodies of water that could potentially be subject to this proposal, much of it has to do with their proximity to existing rivers and streams and other waterways. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And this has been an ongoing fight with the Clean Water Act, how far it applies for a few decades. Right. And really, the issue is not whether the big river you see outside is going to be protected. It's going to be whether those things that are right adjacent to the river, wetlands and the kind of wet areas that many of us, I used to be a hydrologist, saw as connected to the river and impacting like the river's biology and chemistry, and just, a lot of times wetlands as kind of like the livers of a system, which helps clean it out. Those are the things that this new rule really are not going to be protected, because they don't, quote, have like have a surface connection, a continuous surface connection with that other water body, such as the river. And so those are the things that really make development hard. And in 2023, there was a major Supreme Court case called Sackett v. EPA, where there was a couple in rural Idaho who were trying to build a home, and they filled in a wetland to do so. And the EPA came in, no, that's actually a wetland. You need a permit. You need to undo that. It destroyed a wetland, and they were threatened with money damages and repairs. They challenged the Supreme Court, said, nope, that's not the way the EPA determined that is not in line with the state. Therefore, we want the EPA and other agencies to look at what a WOTUS is differently. And so then, first the Biden administration and now the Trump administration has been figuring out how to implement that court decision, that Sackett decision, into regulations. And this is the Trump administration's attempt at that.
Okay. Now, are there any examples of tribes currently uncertain about how to navigate these issues after the Sackett decision?
I think there's probably hundreds of them that are. We got a really great example. We held a Clean Water Act convening about a month ago or 2 months ago up in Boulder. It had a lot of good tribal participation, and we had a wetlands biologist come in from a Northwest tribe explaining really how that tribe was trying to set up a fish hatchery, right, and trying to determine how to do it, and really unclear on who had jurisdiction. Talking about off-reservation waters at this point, and the ability of tribes to kind of protect those waters through some means, or to even just kind of interact and do projects on them. They weren't sure it was going to be determined a wetland or not. And if it was a wetland and it was a WOTUS, then the EPA, then they'd go through these process. If it wasn't, then they had to go through a different process. And that uncertainty is often the case. And the data and the amount of information needed to support that to the tribe was feeling fairly buried in. And so trying to navigate like the uncertainty of like what the water body that you're faced with is going to be, really it hurts what tribes are trying to do on the ground.
Also, the Sackett decision, it shifts responsibility on to states and tribes as opposed to the federal government. What concerns do you have with that shift that could take place?
Yeah, there's a lot of concerns, because there are states who just don't have any state agency that can do that. A state finally has never protected before, and it do not have an agency that can actually do that. We heard about that through one of our talks with the state of Colorado, an incredible amount. We have to basically create a new agency to do a lot more than it's ever done or that we had imagined. I mean, the financial burden, just the program. And then you need state laws to kind of come in and fill those areas where oftentimes they didn't exist to begin with. There's that. And then I think, my understanding is there are some states who are just kind of prohibit some regulate certain types of waters. And so in some instances, you will run into states who are not going to regulate it at all.
Okay. Daniel, this boils down to a case of jobs and economic development versus the environment. And we have a lot of these issues on our show and a lot of these issues across Indian country. And there are many tribes who do benefit from having restrictions on oil and other development removed. Won't this offer opportunities for those tribes?
All these regulations that we especially in our approach it as how does this affect Indian country? There's always going to be pluses and minuses, right? There's going to be good things and bad things. I think a lot of tribes inherently be able to be protective of their environment, not necessarily to keep it in pristine condition and untouched condition, but in a sustainable long-term condition that they're able to, interact with it over time. The concern with these regulations, whether it's this or some of the other NEPA or even ESA regulations, is that it pushes you for use and extinction of the resource much faster, and in a way that really puts the thumb on economic drivers rather than anything else. And while some tribes might be their bottom line, sure, and this quicker, some other tribes might want to benefit from this too, but be making sure that they also are trying to do in a good way. So I do think there probably will be some regulatory benefits for folks, and I think there's probably a lot of room to improve the regulatory environment. I mean,
okay,
to get projects done is really hard. I think in the last maybe in the different administrations, it's just taken too long. Even democratic ones, I think it was too much for a lot of tribes. And so I really appreciate and value that, but I do think there needs to be a better balance between the two.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Loosening of EPA oversight over waterways. Does it benefit or hurt your community? Give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. A New Mexico town changes the name of a park in honor of a celebrated frontiersman who is also known for his brutal military campaigns against Southwest tribes. And federal officials in Michigan remove a monument placed on sacred land. We'll look at these and other actions to better reflect historical representation on the next Native America Calling.
The Indian Arts and Crafts Act protects authentic American Indian and Alaska Native artists and craftspeople and their art and craftwork. Under the Act, it is illegal to market art or craftwork misrepresented as American Indian, Native American, or Alaskan Native made, or as the product of a particular Indian tribe. Reporting potential Act violations can be done at doi.gov/IACB or at 1-888-ART-FAKE. Support provided by Indian Arts and Crafts Board.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We're looking at the future of federal protections under the Clean Water Act and what a recent proposal by the EPA would mean for tribes. Join us with a comment or questions by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. You can also comment on our website or social media pages. We're talking now with Daniel Cordalis, staff attorney with the Native American Rights Fund, who leads the Tribal Water Institute. And Daniel, before break, we talked about what this could potentially mean, how it could potentially benefit some tribes in terms of economic development, loosening these restrictions. But there's also a question here of sovereignty, because many tribes call for their ability to exercise their sovereignty on their own land without having to go through the EPA and other federal agencies. Could this be considered a step in the right direction for them?
I don't read the rule this way, and I read the, we're talking about really how the Clean Water Act, how tribes interact with the Clean Water Act. And tribes do this in two different ways, right? One, they kind of depend on it to through a lot of state and federal work and EPA work to make sure that waters are of good quality that they'll be able to use. The waters that come from off reservation on a reservation are of the quality that will support tribal communities, right, and our needs. Another way is that tribes actually are delegated a lot of responsibility when the tribes want to have it through the Clean Water Act. And to me, that's a real source of power for tribes to be able to manage on reservation projects and potentially polluters, and sometimes off polluters too, in a really significant way. To me, that reduction of the Clean Water Act power does not offset by empowering a tribe. But to me, I don't see any strong gains of tribal sovereignty through a reduction of the Clean Water Act scope.
I want to ask you about a specific case. The Biden administration's EPA went after the state of Alaska for water pollution violations. Now, the Trump administration has all but ignored that complaint. How does this proposed Clean Water Act change? How does that play into this situation?
Yeah, I'm offhand, I'm not familiar with that. I need to kind of look at that more closely. What I will say what this proposed rule does in Alaska, I think, is fairly profound because it really limits what wetlands are going to be protected. Alaska has just an incredible amount of wetlands, right? And if they're wetlands or not, whatever they are, and there's potentially a lot of water that's going to be left unprotected and now subject to Alaska jurisdiction. And Alaska has had a fairly spotty record, I'll say, on doing the things that tribes feel like they need to do to protect their own sovereignty.
What trends beyond this proposal are you seeing from the current administration when it comes to protections for water?
Say that again. I'm sorry. What's the first part of that question?
What trends beyond this proposal we're talking about here from the current administration are you seeing with regard to protections for water?
Sure. The Clean Water Act, it's a regulatory law, right? And so that, much like a lot of the other EPA programs, is a pollution-focused type statute. And so in that context throughout, whether it's Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and even the ESA in some regards, more species, there's just a lot of pulling back to supporting, quote, an energy first agenda, right? And so I think the regulatory changes we see here are consistent with what the administration's done across those, making it easier for project developers to basically get projects on the ground, right? In terms of, let's say, broader water policy, I think it's been pretty quiet. Let's say in the area of Indian water rights, I mean, we don't hear a lot from the government. I think it's been pretty. Nothing's moved much, I'll say. Like, let's say in the Interior Department on tribal water policy and trying to get settlements done, or whether or not the Bureau of Reclamation is trying to move out a lot of projects. Colorado River's been a major source of I wouldn't say controversy, but of attention, trying to get a management plan done here, which is due imminently. Tribes have not had a great footing in there. I don't know if the federal government is going to be stepping forward in a significant way to support both the states and tribes on that. That's to be determined. But I do think the focus, and tribes get caught up in this. It's not tribal specific policy, but it's policy aimed to do other things, other political agenda things that tribes get caught up in. And I think that's probably the case, probably no matter the administration. But in this way, the policies and the proposals are trying to move quickly in the favor of developers, which makes it harder for tribes to keep up. It's harder for our tribes to get consultation on projects that we need. This proposed rule, I think they're going to do a consultation at the end of this week, one of them in Bismarck, one virtual one next week, and then comments are due January 5th, the day basically everyone returns back to work. Mm-hmm. So to us, it feels like there's a real kind of rapid pace that the administration wants to move in and the agencies want to move in, that makes it extremely difficult for tribes to keep up and stay informed in a way that we should be.
Okay. Daniel, one more question before we bring in our next guest. AI data centers, headlines everywhere, right? They use an enormous amount of electricity. They use an enormous amount of water. And this past summer, the president issued an executive order for accelerated federal permitting of data center infrastructure. How are AI centers connected to this proposed rule?
I think if you were to kind of try to want to plop a data center down in a place that is surrounded by some water, you would probably like the proposed rule because you wouldn't necessarily be worried that you're going to violate the Clean Water Act. You're going to see maybe a pond there, or you're going to see a little wet area, and you're not going to worry maybe that you're going to violate the Clean Water Act. And so I see that as being really the number one thing related to data centers. It'll make it easier for them to get to site them, physically. Whether or not the state that they're located in requires a water right associated with that is a different sort of analysis.
1-800-996-2848. That's the number to our Albuquerque studio. We've got the phone lines open right now. We have our producers. They're waiting for you to call. We sure would like to get some listeners to join our conversation now. Let us know your thoughts with regard to the EPA and protections for water. Also, what are some of the water issues that you're facing in your community? Do you have issues with regard to EPA oversight that you would like clarification on, or you'd like to share with our listeners? 1-800-996-2848. We are a platform that enables you to do that. Give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Bishop, California is Terry Red Owl. She is the executive director of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission. She is Bishop Paiute. Terry, good morning. Great to have you on the show today.
Monahu, thank you for inviting me, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation this morning.
I am too. Well, a large amount of groundwater in California's Owens Valley, where you live, it's pumped south to the city of Los Angeles. That's about 200 miles away. What are the main effects that a person visiting Owens Valley can view with their own eyes?
Yeah, so the first thing, if you're driving up from the city of Los Angeles, which is about actually 270 miles away, when you come into our valley, you're going to see what we refer to now as a drained lake. And this lake that we traditionally call Patsiata was a 110 square mile navigable lake, one of the largest lakes in the state of California before it was dried up by the city of Los Angeles. So when you're coming into our valley, that's the first thing you see is this huge dry lake that has been the largest source of dust pollution in the United States. This lake was dried up in just under 10 years when Los Angeles began diverting the water in 1913. So that's what you're going to see. And as you travel further north, you'll see areas of where there's a lot of invasive species, tumbleweeds, and other plants that were not here that have taken over. They've taken over our meadows. You're going to see, if you get out and walk the land, you'll see remnants of where springs used to exist. Our whole entire valley was a spring. We had springs that flowed up throughout the entire valley that produced really tall grasses and all the foods that we needed and provided habitat for the animals. You'll see places where there's canals, where there's waterways that no longer have water flowing in them. And then you'll see the beautiful mountains where the Creator has blessed us to live and to care for, and that's where the water comes in the form of snow, and now as we are seeing shifts in the climate, oftentimes in the form of rain. And so you might not see indigenous people because we are on extremely tiny reservations. Our entire valley floor is about 458,000 acres of land, and the majority of that land, over 95% of it, is owned by the city of Los Angeles, so it's undeveloped land. The tribes collectively have just over 1,700 acres of land, so we have just less than 1/3 of 1% of the land here in the valley. So you really have to go looking for us in order to see us, which is really sad because we are the original peoples of this land.
Okay. Now, Terry, somebody listening to the show right now might think, well, the city of Los Angeles, they own a lot of this land that we're talking about. Doesn't that ownership allow for their use of the water?
Well, I mean, we disagree with that because, I mean, when you own land, does that give you a right to destroy the surrounding habitat, the habitat that's on that land? Does it give you a right to displace people from their cultural sites and from the places that are important to them, that are now on land that you technically own, as far as the colonizers or Western way of looking at land ownership, like it's titled to you? No, we don't believe that gives Los Angeles the right. We believe that water is a right that was given by the Creator, and that all people should have access, and not just people, but also the plants, the animals, from the insects to the birds to the four-legged to the aquatic animals. They all have a right to the water. And we also believe that the land itself, the rocks, right? So like I have ancestors and elders that have told me that we used to be in such harmony with nature that we were able to commune even with the rocks. And we hosted a youth camp one year, and we're like, we need to have a theme. And so I spoke to an elder, and he goes, you really need to listen to the rock. Listen to what the land is telling you. And so that's really what our roots are, is tied to the land and tied to the water. And where the Creator puts the water, in my humble opinion, that's where He intended the water to be. That's the life that the water was to take care of. Now, Los Angeles, exporting our water and taking it over 270 miles away to a place that already produces enough water to meet all of their needs, is not okay. It's not okay to the environment. It's not okay to the indigenous people. It's not okay to the plants, the animals, the land, the rocks.
Thanks, Terry. Earlier, you described what a visitor can see with their own eyes with regard to the landscape, the drought. What about the effects that people can't see? Please explain.
Yeah. So one of the things that I started noticing about 30 years ago, I've been working for the Water Commission just over 31 years now, the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission. And there used to be, because of all the groundwater pumping that takes place here in our valley, so not only does Los Angeles take the majority of all the runoff and the snow melt, but they also pump groundwater throughout the valley in these areas that they divide up and call well fields. So the devastating impacts that we have seen and experienced from that groundwater pumping is a lot of our trees have died, the native vegetation, but especially the trees, the larger trees. And so we used to see the evidence of that. So you would see dead trees here and there. And when people began using those as examples of how our environment is being impacted, Los Angeles came in and they started cleaning up all the dead trees. They started cutting them up and moving them, off the land. So there was no longer evidence that there was even a tree there. And so sometimes, unless you've lived here and you've seen that and you know that there used to be trees there and there used to be dead trees there, you might not ever see that. And with the way that Los Angeles does their groundwater pumping, you might be in an area like Bishop, where I live, and it looks green to the eyes because there's a decree in place where LA can't pump groundwater from a place that's called the Bishop Cone. So any groundwater pumping that's done has to be used on that cone. And so that area is green. But the pumping that's even happening on the cone, it is drawing down water from other areas. So if you're on the cone and you're not traveling out to these other places, you might not see that. You might not see it with the eyes. You may not see the impacts that the groundwater pumping and the, taking the water and displacing the indigenous people from our lands has had on the indigenous people. We deal with a lot of issues that a lot of Native communities deal with as far as, social justice impacts. And it really is a result of us being disconnected from the land, not having enough land to not just live on, but to thrive on. And our communities are really hurting. A lot of our communities are hurting right now, from even fighting with each other as a result of not having access to land, not having access to the water.
Tribes in Owens Valley in California pushing for negotiations with the city of Los Angeles over water rights. And much has been written about how Los Angeles acquired its water more than 100 years ago. Movies have been made about it. It's been fictionalized, and we're getting the Native perspective of some of this history and how it's playing out today in 2025, all these years later. Terry Red Owl is our current guest. She's the executive director of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back, and we're going to talk more with Terry. We have more questions, and we'll get more information with regard to how this is impacting indigenous peoples. Phone lines are open for listeners. Please join our conversation. Let us know your thoughts. If you have questions, if you have insights, perspectives to share, 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. Phone lines are open.
Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions. Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions.
You are listening to Native America Calling. We're taking a look at the history of the city of Los Angeles pumping water out of Owens Valley and how the region has been left parched for tribes. You can always listen back to this show and other types of Native American programming by downloading the NV1 app to your smart device. And if you'd like to join the conversation, call us at 1-800-99-NATIVE. We're talking now with Terry Red Owl. She's in Bishop, California, where she is the executive director of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission. And Terry, let's go back again because this history here is so fascinating. Los Angeles started to divert water from Owens Lake back in 1913. What was the immediate effect when that took place?
Yeah, so I would say the immediate effect is LA began doing whatever they could do to buy up more lands in the valley from the farming and ranching communities that existed at the time. They began lobbying the United States government to remove from trust lands that had been set aside for the indigenous people, the Native Americans here, even my own family members. They also began purchasing Indian allotments that were owned by tribal people here in the valley. And when they did that, it was really with the sole purpose of gaining more power and more control over the land and giving them more access to water and to their future plans, which was to install all of these groundwater wells throughout the valley. So not only would they be taking the surface water and diverting that, but they would also be able to have access to the abundant groundwater that once was abundant, but now has been severely impacted by their years and years and years of groundwater pumping. And then, of course, as the water was diverted from Patsiata, that lake was very sacred to us because it was the terminus lake in our valley. It was a place where we gathered food. It was a source of nutrition for us that got us through the lean winter months. And so we would gather the brine flies off of that lake and store them, literally by the bushels. And then it was also a very important stopping ground and resting ground for migratory birds, and millions of migratory birds. And those were also food sources for us, but they were also impacted when the water was diverted from that lake. And then in addition to that, there was like fencing that was put up, places that we were able to enter, lands that we lived on and we gathered on and we hunted on, that we no longer had access to, and we had to go around and we couldn't go through those places. And you also saw attempts at forcibly marching us out of our homelands, trying to coerce us to leave willingly when the marches didn't keep us out of our homelands. There was a lot of things happening in the background that eventually resulted in this land exchange between the United States government and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, whereby the U.S. government gave up nearly 3,000 acres of land that was held for our people that we were living on in exchange for just under 1,400 acres of land that are now the current home bases for the Bishop, Big Pine, and Lone Pine tribes. And that land exchange happened, was authorized by Congress in 1937. The agreements and everything was signed in 1939, and we are still living on those same size reservations, but our population has continued to grow exponentially, and we've really have outgrown those lands, and to this day, we're seeing the results of living on places that can no longer accommodate us as a people.
Okay.
And also the animals. Like one of my coworkers that started working here 7 years ago, the first time he saw a rabbit was a couple years ago, and he goes, "I didn't even know you guys had rabbits." And the rabbits used to be abundant. That was what provided our clothing, that provided blankets, that provided food for us.
Terry, you mentioned how your community, your population is increasing exponentially, and Los Angeles as well has increased exponentially, a much larger city than it was back in 1913. How well do you think officials now today there in LA understand just how much water is being consumed now in your region?
Oh, I believe they have a very good understanding of that. They know that with restrictions and water shortages on the Colorado River, that the Owens Valley, which we call Payahinadu, is still a place where they technically, on paper, own this land. And so they know exactly how much water is up here. They know exactly how much water is being put on these different mitigation projects that they've been forced to do and aren't necessarily doing per se. They know exactly what's up here. If you look at all of their projects, their Operation Next, their Pure Water Project, the new Green Deal, all these different policies and programs that they put in place, when you read those documents, it always says they still plan on exporting the same levels of water, same amount of water that they've historically done in the Owens Valley. But the thing that's shifting, as climate is shifting and the things that we're seeing, the changes that we're experiencing, there's not as much water available to them today as there used to be, back when they first started diverting. And I think it really has a lot to do with when you take water from the land and there's no longer water there, then the water isn't being produced. It interrupts the water cycle. You have to have water in order to draw the water back. And one of the things that I've always said about what it's going to take for LA to stop exporting water or really do some huge reductions in the amount of water that they're taking out of Payahinadu, out of our homelands, is divine intervention. And sadly, we're seeing that. And when I say sadly, I don't mean that I regret that we're seeing that. I just mean that the impacts to what we're dealing with on a daily basis is being it's compounded.
Okay.
Because when there isn't water available, then they're relying more on pumping groundwater. So if there's not as much runoff, then they want to pump more groundwater. And when they pump the groundwater, then we see the damages to that. But at some point, nature's going to say enough is enough, and you got to start looking elsewhere, LA. And where do they need to look? In their own area. There's been so many studies done that shows that the amount of water that falls, from the rainfall down there can supply more than what Los Angeles needs now and into the future. So they've really got to become more serious about reinvesting in reclaiming the water, cleaning up the water, but also storing the water. So they get these huge rain events in LA, and the river becomes an actual river again, and it's raging, but they don't have good systems in place in order to capture and hang on to that water so they can use it when they need it. And so that's what they've got to focus on. Instead of building up every space of piece of land that's available down there, is like looking at areas where they can store. How can they clean up their groundwater, their own groundwater aquifers, and store that water underground in Los Angeles?
And Terry, when you voice these concerns and you offer these possible solutions, do you get any indication that officials in LA are willing to confront the problem as you see it? And I'm also curious to know, how much leverage do you and your other tribal partners have to make a difference here?
Yeah, we are seeing that. I mean, I see LA is moving in that direction, and they're with their water recycling and reclamation and stuff. It actually costs them more money to supply water to different places by doing that than just by simply taking water from our homeland. But the leadership down there has said that, no, this is important to us and we want to continue investing in this. They have a ratepayer advocate that looks at how to keep the water rates as low as possible for their ratepayers in Los Angeles. And my understanding is, there has been some opposition to these projects of reclaiming water and capturing water because it costs a little bit more dollar-wise. But if you look at what the cost is as far as environmental justice and social justice for the people, it actually doesn't cost as much. And so there has been a commitment from LA to, despite these concerns of their ratepayers and some of their constituents, and it's not everybody down there, but there are people that feel this way, that, no, you shouldn't be investing in these technologies because it costs too much. But they are moving forward with that, and I appreciate that. But there's got to be more done. And there has to be more done with the mindset that we're not going to be able to continue taking water from Paihanaru. And I don't think that mind shift, we've seen that mind shift yet. LA's position is, well, we own that. That's ours. We own it. We have a right to it. So we don't need to think about not taking water from there, because why should we? We bought it. We paid for it. It's ours. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Just how much leverage you folks have. I mean,
Okay.
LA, one of the biggest cities in the world, and just the enormous amount of money down there and political influence.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about LA is there are people that care. Like, there's a lot of people there. There's millions of people down there, but there's a lot of people that care and want to make sure that what they're doing in their daily lives isn't having such a devastating impact on other regions and other areas. And so as we move in towards trying to educate people on what the impacts are of taking water from our homelands and moving it to LA, we have found that there's such a huge base of supporters that want to see LA do something different as far as supplying water to Los Angeles. And we are making impacts by going and talking to the communities and educating them. Some people don't even know where their water comes from. Like when we first did one of our first outreach events at an Indigenous Peoples Day event that former Councilman Mitch O'Farrell was able to bring to Los Angeles. I think it was the first major city in the United States that celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day. We asked them, do you know where your water comes from? And some people did, but a lot of people didn't. And when we began telling them this is where your water comes from, and this is what it's doing to us, and this is how it's impacting our environment. And the people, they're like, hey, that's not okay. We want to do something different. And so we have gained momentum by meeting people and talking to them, and we have a lot of environmental groups and other social groups that support the work that we're doing and have hosted events for us to come down and share with the communities. We're really been very fortunate where we've been able to hire organizers to help tell our story, to bring people together. We are getting the attention of the decision makers in Los Angeles because the voters care. A lot of the voters care. A lot of the ratepayers care. And so there are inroads being made, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And so I believe that when we first started, we're like, gosh, how do we change the mind shift? And the way of thinking down there. And it really is helping people understand that you can still get water. We're not going to cut off your water. You have water down here. And it's just a matter of tapping into that.
All right. We have time for one caller here if we make it pretty quick. Jim, who is listening on Interlochen Public Radio up in Michigan. Hello, Jim. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for this program. I'm an environmental water rights lawyer in Michigan for 50 years, and I'm very aware of the California situation and particularly the land ownership issue in which the tribe, as you've explained, face, claiming that there's some absolute right to property. And in fact, it's a right to use water, but that includes the right to divert it based on the Western Appropriation Doctrine, which we don't have in Michigan. But my question is, with the National Audubon case, California Supreme Court, and the more recent cases that are following that doctrine and limiting the removal of tributary waters, including, I think, arguably groundwater, are the tribes gaining leverage? I mean, certainly the public as a whole is, because I think the right is that is being claimed, these appropriation rights, L.A., which they claimed in the Model Lake case, is qualified by the public trust doctrine, and certainly the tribes enjoy the protection of that doctrine in addition to the tribal treaties. But is that leverage, is that beginning to build leverage if necessary?
Okay, Jim, geez, I wish you'd called earlier because that is a great question. But Terry, can you handle this question? Can you field it in about a minute?
Yeah, I'll do my best. There is some momentum there, but one of the things that Los Angeles has been very successful in doing is exempting themselves from some of these laws and acts that have come out, particularly in the state of California. But one of the things I do want to say is that the tribes were using the water first. We were diverting the water first. We were here first. The only thing that has stopped us from having access to that water is we were forcibly moved off of our lands, and others came in and claimed that water. And so we are looking at ways to go back and look at the appropriated water rights and figure out a way, how can we claim that we were first in time, first in line, using it? We didn't willingly leave that water and desert that water. So how do we get it back? Right now we do have a federal water rights assessment team that's been appointed. We are looking for Los Angeles to say, yes, we will negotiate with the tribes. That's the only thing the federal team needs in order to appoint this negotiation team. So one of the things we're doing is getting support to convince the mayor and the deputy mayor to say yes to negotiations with the tribes in Payahinatu.
Terry, great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for spending time with our listeners.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'd love to come back sometime.
Absolutely. Well, we've reached the end of the hour, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But big thanks to our guest today, Terry Red Owl, and also Daniel Cordalis. Join us again tomorrow for a look at recent decisions to revisit monuments that conflict with Native cultural and historical values. I'm Sean Spruce. Hope you'll tune in.
Ready to expand your reach and inspire change? Kaufman & Associates crafts culturally grounded communication strategies for Native audiences. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiverresources. The Association on American Indian Affairs invites all to Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. Tribal museums may offer no-cost or reduced admission, art markets, and live cultural demonstrations. Tribal Museums Day honors diverse Native nations as the experts of their own cultures. You can find a map of tribal museums and more at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.